That's CPD Show. My name is Chris Bright and I'll be your host, and today I'm joined by Reverend Mark Button. Mark has been in full-time ministry since 2003, first leading an AOG church in Ruskington, Lincolnshire, before moving to Hull to pioneer a church plant birthed out of partnership between the Methodist Church and the Pioneer Network. Mark has studied at Mattersey Hall, completing his BA in Biblical and Applied Theology in 2003, and then studied for his MA in Biblical Studies, from which he graduated in 2015. He currently lectures on Pauline studies at Missio Dei. Mark is married to Deana and they have 2 children, Micah and Georgia, and 1 dog. He loves sports as well as eating out, watching good films and reading. Mark, that's a great bio. Thank you so much for joining me today.
No problem. Great to be here.
Brilliant. Well, it's great to talk about development resources, but before, this is dessert island development. So I think it would be remiss of us not to talk about your favorite dessert. So could you tell me, what is your favorite dessert?
Okay. So I put a lot of thought into this. I'm going with, there's several contenders, but I'm going with baked vanilla cheesecake or New York cheesecake. Yes.
New York. So tell me about it. Tell me why you love it. You know, have you had it? You know, you say you like eating out. Is it, if you had it somewhere, or is it?
Well, actually, this is one. So at Christmas, this is one of my specialities. I've got a few things that I do around Christmas time, and the cheesecake is one of them. So we have that for our Christmas tea, or but each year there's a bit of a story with it, because one of the skills of making it is that you have to cook it just right so that it doesn't crack. And if anyone's tried this, they might have found it. For a few years, I've basically had it where it's cracked. Still tastes amazing, but it cracks on top, probably because I've overcooked it. You've got to let it cool at the right kind of pace. But this year I managed to get it right. So it was a perfect cheesecake. So yeah, I love it. Just love the taste. But yeah, it takes a bit of time to make it, so I don't do it all that often, but it's one I love. And if I do go out, yes, it's something that I would look for on the menu if I was eating out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a New York cheesecake is an absolutely classic dessert. Yeah. It's always one of those things, because you have to bake it and then cool it down. So it's a cold dessert that's been baked, which I think is always that's that little bit of extra, because normally you can make a cheesecake without having to do any baking at all, but it's that sort of little extra step which seems to make it.
Exactly. And like I say, you can't just open the oven door because all the cold air goes in. That's the problem. You just got to open it slightly, let it cool gradually, then it should be fine. So yeah.
I like it. So I like, because what you've got there is there's very much, the technical aspects of it. We've had people that I've already done some podcasts with, and they will talk about the taste, but they've not got into the kind of making of it. And so I'm liking that we've already got into the...
This is what I'm like. When I get onto something, I keep going at it to perfect it. So there's been a few things, and over lockdowns, I was perfecting macarons as well, which are quite tricky to make. So, but yeah, I kept just going and going at them until I got it right. So I quite like all of that sort of thing, learning the skill as well as, yes, eating it.
Fantastic. Well, my dessert I'll talk about is it's kind of, I'm still trying to work out whether it is my favorite. I think it might be my favorite, which is tiramisu. I love a tiramisu. I can't explain why. I think it's because I love coffee, probably. That's firstly. And it's just, I don't know, it just seems to work for me. The coffee with the sponge fingers, the cream, just seems to work for me. So that would be a dessert, although I can't talk about my favorite dessert now because I've talked about so many desserts that I've had. So I think all desserts are my favorite. I think this is becoming something that I need to be careful about, I think. Well, great to talk about desserts. So should we move on to the development side of things? So we've got 3 resources today we're going to talk through. Mark, do you want to talk through your first resource?
Okay, yeah. So the first one I've picked is Surprised by Hope by Tom Wright. I think it would be safe to say, or not too much of an overstatement to say, that this book changed my life and really set me on the path to everything that I'm studying now, really getting involved in sort of the more academic world. I hadn't planned really on going back to do a master's, but that book kind of ignited something in me that then I wanted to pursue further study. And but there's a lot of different ideas that are brought out in that book that really struck a chord with where I was at and helped me in my thinking. And so, yeah, that's certainly one of the books that's really influential.
Great. Well, let's dig into the what the book's about. I've got this book on an audio platform and it's ready to read, and I haven't read it yet. So I think probably getting a short précis from you would be really great.
Okay, so I mean, I think the first thing to say with Tom Wright is that when I studied for my BA, his was a name that you didn't really mention much because he had these interesting ideas. There's something within Pauline studies, people talk about the new perspective, and this was all viewed with suspicion. And so it was kind of like, oh, are we okay with what he's saying? Are we not? And so it's interesting that over like the past 15, 20 years, I've seen this development of Tom Wright going from someone who's kind of on the fringes in terms of our understanding to now, like, you know, his name's everywhere, and even within evangelical churches, it's very popular. So that's been an interesting thing to see. This book is really all about the gospel and what the message really is. And I think for me, when I was leading church, I was kind of having some thoughts that we sort of reduced the gospel down to this kind of it's about me getting my ticket to heaven. You know, if I say a sinner's prayer, nothing wrong with any of these things, but it felt kind of very small, very reduced down. And yet when you're reading the New Testament, there's a lot more. And certainly he's looking at what Paul is saying, but the wider New Testament, wider Bible, and just seeing the richness. And so what he does is he explores a lot of things about kind of the ways we've reduced it down, but also some of the ways that we need to celebrate this good news, which is good news for me, but it's good news for the world. It's good news for everyone. And it's more than just where we're going when we die. It's about God making all things new. And so, like I say, this has been very influential in helping me to think through what is the purpose of us, you know, our faith, and what are we doing here? And so some of those ideas about God restoring and making things new come out in the book. I think one of the classic lines, it's certainly a Tom Wright line, and I think it comes out in the book, is heaven is important, but it's not the end of the world. So it's this idea that, you know, we're doing more than just, you know, my soul is going to heaven and we'll kind of, you know, the sort of popular imagery of we'll float on clouds and that kind of thing. But actually, our role as Christians is to bring the kingdom on earth and to see that good news shared with as many people as possible. Good news for now, yes, good news for eternity, but good news for today as well. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic! I mean, that sounds absolutely fascinating, and I understand you're a bit of a Tom Wright fan, as it were.
Yeah. So I think, you know, again, some of his ideas would be challenged in scholarship. People would critique some of what he says, and you know, like I think, you know, that's the way it kind of works. But like I say, his ideas have really influenced me and opened the Bible up. Certainly opened the world of Paul up to me in new ways. So when I teach Paul, which is basically any opportunity I get, if I'm honest, so whatever lecture I'm teaching, I tend to sort of gravitate back towards Paul. But I think that what we've tended to do when it comes to things like the gospel certainly is, you know, we reduce it down. So we take a letter like Romans and we reduce it down to a few key verses. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Gift of God is eternal life. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. All very important, but there is so much more. And I think that's where Wright particularly set me on that journey of realizing, there is so much more to read here. There is so much more what he's saying and to what Paul is saying. And so things like, you know, just that idea of God making things new, stuff. I saw a little video actually the other day about citizenship, and what that means. Our citizenship is in heaven, and actually how that is our responsibility to bring God's life, God's world to the here and now. It's not about where we're going, it's about us being citizens of heaven now, and making a difference. And I think we can lose sight of some of that. So I've read a lot of his stuff, both at a popular level and a scholarly level, and it's just been really key in terms of my thinking. And I highly recommend him to others who are sort of wanting to explore and branch out into kind of exploring Paul's letters in new ways.
Yeah, I mean, I've listened to, he has a podcast, the Ask NT Wright Anything podcast, which I really enjoy. And I think listening to NT Wright has been really helpful for me in terms of kind of getting out of my thinking of what I grew up with, which was that it's a kind of an escapist theology, which is we're going to get off this earth and go to heaven. And I think Tom Wright does that expertly in terms of recognizing that actually that's not the hope of the New Testament, of sort of escaping earth to get away to somewhere else, but actually what God's doing in terms of recreating heaven and earth, and the hope of resurrection, and how we play a part in that today. I think it's been very transformative for my own journey, I think, certainly. So great. That's Surprised by Hope by Tom Wright. Should we go on to resource number 2?
Yeah. Okay. So I haven't really got 2 books as such to recommend, or a book as such, but there's 2 people I think who again just really helped me in my thinking and brought a different perspective on leadership and ministry. And so these are Brené Brown and Caroline Leaf, Dr. Caroline Leaf, Dr. Brené Brown. And I think people will have heard of them. Brené Brown had a TED talk that kind of went viral and lots of people watching it, and Caroline Leaf, lots of books and resources and their material. So I think 2 that have really helped me were Dare to Lead by Brené Brown, Think, Learn, Succeed by Caroline Leaf, just helping me understand that world of kind of psychology, and something that we don't often pay attention to in Christian leadership. But this is something that I think, we need to be more spun up on. We need to be more aware of kind of how the mind works. Brené Brown talks a lot about vulnerability, the power of vulnerability. I think it's so important. In Caroline Leaf's book, Think, Learn, Succeed, she talks about healthy mindsets and just things like that help bring a different perspective on leadership. I think, it's just really helped me.
No, that's great. I'd love to kind of find out what impact that's had on you in terms of your leadership, and how has, maybe something like Think, Learn, Succeed, or Dare to Lead, what are those books, what have they changed in you in terms of maybe how you think or how you operate? Yeah,
so I think sometimes in Christian leadership, we sort of, his top tips, 10 steps to being a great leader, and it can sort of move towards one type of experience and idea. And I think that all of that can be good and helpful, but it can miss something. And I think what these books did was to shed light on a different discipline, a different world that actually we haven't always embraced. So sometimes within church circles, Christian circles, we can be flippant with things when it comes to mental health, mental well-being, just overall kind of our emotions. We would have had this idea that emotions are almost things to be feared, and don't be down, joy of the Lord is your strength, and some of that can come from a good place, but actually it can be unhelpful if it's not used wisely. And I think what those books did was to help me reflect on kind of my own well-being, and to embrace that side. So vulnerability, something that we haven't heard talked a lot about in kind of Christian leadership, not in this way, but actually, oh, okay, it's all right to realize that we need to be vulnerable and to just embrace some of that that side of life. With Caroline Leaf's book, when she talks about healthy mindsets, that really helped me, because I think increasingly, as many people, not just leaders, will face, is that we live in a 24/7 society. We have access to so many resources, and so much, like, our brains can just be full constantly. We're bombarded with information. We have emails pinging in all the time, notifications popping up on our phone. And she talks in the first part of that book about just different mindsets that we need. And I think it helped me to realize, actually, you need to slow down and give space. So it talks about having that room in your day to just think and process, and we neglect these things. And it helped me realize, actually, having some space just to be quiet isn't a bad thing. I think when we're leaders, we can have this, got to be on the go, got to be busy, got to be pushing everything, pushing the boundaries. And actually, no, you need to slow down, you need to take some time. The learning part of that book was also really helpful in just the process of, actually, this is the way that you can learn new skills, and it's quite an involved process, and she goes through it all, but it was really helpful, because when you're trying to learn things in my study, I could utilize that, and it would help me grow. So just really anything around that world of health, well-being, that I think we're getting, we're becoming more appreciative of, and getting a better understanding of, is really important for leaders.
I think that's so important. And it's one thing we're doing. This podcast is brought to you by Continuous Professional Development. We're launching the CPD platform for all the AOG GB ministers, and as a part of that, we've tried to think as holistically as possible, so that we're not just thinking of personal development in terms of all about leadership or all about theology, which all of those things are great, of course. But thinking about, actually, there's more of a holistic development that's very necessary for ministers. So it's not all just theology, which is great. We love theology, and of course you teach theology, but there's also that aspect that we need to be healthy ministers in all of our life. So that could be in terms of health, it could be mental health. It could be as simple as needing to get a fitness plan together, and that is personal development, because it's helping you become the best you can be by being the healthiest you can be. So I think these kind of resources, I think, are so important for ministers to not. I think it can be very easy to sort of neglect the thinking side of things, or the emotional side of things, the emotional health side of things. And I think so. These things will be really helpful for our ministers for sure. Okay.
I think it's about learning. I'm not saying we hide deliberately, but we need to be real. And I think I've learned that sometimes, actually, rather than just quick, there's something happening, let me find a Bible verse that speaks that, and we love the Bible, and of course it's helpful, but actually we start from a place of honesty. This is how I'm feeling, this is what I'm going through, and God meets us in that. But I can talk about my emotions, I can talk about my vulnerability, I realize, I need some space, okay, I need to carve out some time, I need to process. So it's that kind of stuff. And I think that will help us to grow holistically, as you say, as leaders. So
and I think it links back to, if you look at someone like the Apostle Paul, he was actually quite open in his letters about how he was feeling, and and he didn't shy away from things, and able to be quite vulnerable. In it wasn't just all positivity. It was he was honest about where he was at, especially in terms of his mental health. He talks about that and goes into that. So there's lots of that I think we can learn, and it links back to your Pauline studies as well, I think.
Yeah,
Fantastic. Okay, so that's Think, Learn, Succeed by Caroline Leaf and Dare to Lead by Brene Brown as resource number 2. I think having a bonus resource is something that's become more and more popular on this. So it's absolutely fine. Narrowing it down to 3 is almost impossible. But shall we go to resource number 3 now? What's your third resource?
Okay, so this is the Leadership Podcast by Craig Groeschel. I really like Craig Groeschel, his stuff, and there are challenges of reading lots of books, and there's lots that I've got a stack of books that I'm trying to get hold of. So one of the things I do like is just there's podcasts out there, plenty of them, and the Leadership Podcasts, they're short episodes. I think it's once a month they come out, and just very practical, down to earth, and what I particularly like about Craig Groeschel stuff is that it is applicable, or you can see how it fits within your context. So I think sometimes with one of the challenges of leadership material, particularly when you go to conferences, it's like, well, here's someone, they've got a massive church, but it's like, but how does that work within this context here where I am, which is very different. His stuff I find very accessible, and it suits different contexts, and he addresses that kind of thing. So very helpful, just practical guidance and wisdom, really.
Yes, I've listened to a number of episodes of the Craig Groeschel Leadership Podcast, and so many. He has a very accessible way of teaching his material, and it's something like you said, very accessible, regardless of church size. There's something that you can put into it because it's much more sort of principle based rather than I've got a large church or this is what I did and here's how it succeeded. Those things are helpful in their time and in their space, of course. I remember one quote, and I use it quite a lot actually, and it was from the Craig Groeschel podcast, and he said, don't tell your congregation or the people you're leading, my people won't. So don't say my people won't, they won't do this or they won't do that. Say we have not led them to do this. And so and I thought that's so fascinating because it's what it does is it's straight away, because that's applicable to any church, even any business, it recognizing that leadership starts with you taking responsibility for leading your team, your congregation. And I think that changed, it flipped something in my thinking, certainly. Have you had any kind of nuggets of wisdom from the podcast that you can think of?
Well, I'm sure I have. And actually, the one that springs to mind is a bit different, bit random. But before I get onto that, I think that's the thing. Like, I listened to it, and you realise there's something I can take away there, and I don't feel like, oh, I'm a terrible leader, but actually, no, there's something I can take, I can improve. The one thing that we've been thinking about in our house recently, I think in one of the episodes he talked about how it's good for leaders to have something outside of church, and you do realise that if you're not careful, you can find yourself in a place where you are consumed by all of the things of church, and we have to be careful, I think, as leaders, that we love Jesus, we serve Jesus, we are shepherds of the flock. The church is not all of my responsibility. John Andrews, who is a good friend of mine, talks about, or years ago when we were in Bible college, talks about, the world will keep spinning without your involvement. And it is just that realizing, you know what, you can have some time off. You do need something outside of that. You mentioned in my bio, I love sport. So like playing golf, playing tennis, football, something, just actually having something that's different, a hobby. Otherwise, I think we can lose something, and we just talk about holistic living. That's really important. That we've got a well-rounded life. Again, if we're working full-time in church, we're surrounded by Christians, so where are we connecting with people? So all those kind of things. So that actually was helpful for us, and just recently, just something we've been looking at. Actually, have we got hobbies? Have we got interests? It's not just all church all the time, and that's really important. But there's been lots of different things that he's touched on, different subjects, just about bringing in change, developing personally, those kinds of things. And usually I'm listening to it, and there can be just one or two things, but it's just helpful just to keep going and to encouraging me in my own leadership journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always something to get from that podcast, and I think, like you said, even things that are just gonna, looking at things that are have you got a hobby outside of the church world? That's so valuable for being a healthy leader, and so having those podcasts that are going to help you think in a different way, help you find little nuggets of wisdom that are going to help you along your journey. It's not all just going to be ministry stuff. It's going to be stuff that's going to help. And actually, the one thing I like about the podcast is it's not specifically a church podcast. He puts a lot of it into his church context, but it's more general that it links into leadership in general, which I think means that it's applicable in different environments, and that can be really helpful, because it means you can start to, you can think about, okay, well, if I'm helping someone in my church who is a business leader, you've actually got some really good principles that travel across. It's not just church specific stuff, which I think is really great.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, 3 great resources there, or 4 great resources there, and a great dessert as well. I love a baked New York cheesecake as well. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed talking through the things that have really helped develop you in your ministry. So thanks so much for joining me.
No problem. Thank you for having me.